some very interesting presentations in the last day and a half. A lot of them were technical. I'm not going to talk about technology. I've had some 40 plus years of experience with MES, MOM, SCADAs, PLCs, etc. I'm going to touch on the foundation that RT laid, which is the human element. At the end of the day, if you work for a large corporation or you work in the public sector, you visualize these buildings, corporates, but these things are made of individuals like you and I. That is what makes the world tick. So I want to touch a little bit, for those of you who know me, I'm a student of history. I also follow ancient civilizations going back some 8,000 years. And I visited many of these civilizations across many parts of the world, from South America to Asia to Africa, Europe, etc. And I do very little academic research. I do what is called MBWA, management by wandering around and picking up my own intelligence. Now we know that COVID is something none of us have experienced. But if I show you and reflect in history, just going back, not 8,000 years ago, but a few hundred years back, and you would be sitting here saying, thank God I'm not 300 years back, but I'm actually around in 2021. So what are some of the lessons that we can learn from the past? So if we step back just in the 1800s, think about this. There was no democracy. Can you imagine sitting here and not having a voice at the table? It's almost unthinkable. There was universal suffering. Almost everybody suffered, with a few exceptions. There was abject poverty. There were limited franchises. There was absolute monarchy. These are terms that I'm sure are starting to ring a bell from your history lessons, right? Autocratic rule, despotism. And this resulted in what my good friend Naidoo and I spent many, many years talking about, the power and aggregation of individuals like you and I, how we can capsize totalitarian. And you'll see examples. I've given two examples. Remember the French had the nobles and the peasants who were whining and dining where the peasants were suffering. American Revolution, several revolutions, if we cast our mind back. And we've seen this in our own country, in South Africa. Who dreamt that we'd have a new South Africa since 1994? And there's a whole discussion that we're having around South Africa developing from an adolescent child, 27 years, to growing up to become an adult. If we get to the 1900s, what was termed as the Industrial Revolution, there was economic growth, there was societal change, investment in education. There was this move towards urbanization from the agrarian societies. And it was, of course, the creation of unions. Cast your mind back to some of you that are old enough to the Thatcher era in Britain, the UK, and other areas like Australia. The unions call the shots. And in our country, to some extent, we have the same things happening in South Africa, the metal workers' unions, etc., who can hold you to ransom, can hold a country to ransom. And of course, we saw the emergence of social media. And this created a middle class. Anant and I were having a conversation. I've traveled to India for over 30 years, very close to the Tata Group, which I respect tremendously from integrity and leadership. And they created a middle class in the last 30 years of a few 100 million people. How do you do that? What are the lessons that we can take as a country and as a continent through ethical leadership? And of course, through the Industrial Revolution, we realized we can make arms and ammunitions, etc. So we had to find wars to go and utilize these arms and ammunitions. So we had World War I, World War II, where there was universal suffering. There was a history of conflict. There was limited number of very wealthy, which is a slightly different situation that we have in 2021. And there was a need for a balance between the rich, the middle class, and the poor. And after World War II, there was a focus on reindustrialization. And this is where innovation came. And I created a term in 1985 in Silicon Valley, where innovation was seen in Stanford University, Berkeley, UCLA, MIT, etc. It had to do with product. And I invented a term called innovation cube, which had nothing to do with product. And innovation cube is the way we think. And the product becomes the byproduct of our thinking process, focused on the customers that we serve, you, the consumer. And in the 50s and 60s, the world achieved a balance between rich, middle class, and poor. And I'm generalizing. There were pockets of continents and countries that didn't have this. So the last 40 years, this balance has been declining. And this is quite important. The balance between the rich, middle class, and poor has started to decline since. And then what we saw during the 80s, 90s, and to some extent where we are today, a return of autocratic social contract. You're seeing cultural backlashes through the migration from some parts of Africa, Middle East, and other geographies into Europe. You've seen ethnic conflicts that's starting to take place. All these immigration challenges. I was speaking to people in Spain. My niece lives in Barcelona, and the challenges that they're having with the migrants. And it's become a racial, ethnic conflict. But it was okay when we went and conquered them in the early years as invaders from Europe. So this has created an increase in hyperwealth, an increase in right as well as left-wing politics, and the divide is deepening. And the center is starting to collapse. So liberal democracy as we knew it is starting to fall. What do we do about this? In more recent years, and you've seen in the US what is classed as the Red Party and the Blue Party with Trumpism and others, there's been a clash of civilizations, big ones being US, China, and a few others in between. It was okay when the US was perceived as number one, when you've seen the rise of an Asian empire, who ruled in the first century, by the way, together with India. And we'll have another conversation of time, and time is timeless, and how you get back through your ego bashing where you have a fall of your empire. Free markets, and there's a focus on domestic self-interest versus global interconnectedness. And we had some discussions yesterday afternoon in a panel discussions around localization. It's not an either-or situation. You need both. You need global interconnectedness while addressing your home challenges. We have a population of almost 60 million people, of which over 44% is unemployed at the moment. 10 million youth in this country is unemployed. It is a frightening. If you're sitting here today and you're not concerned about those statistics, you got a problem. You got a serious, serious problem. And then what you've seen is the emergence of so-called developing countries. Some of them that ruled in those centuries that I talked about. The rise of China, India, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. And where do they start? They start with textiles, and then they move to high-tech. Okay? South Korea could not spell manufacturing 30 years ago. Samsung, LG are the brands you prefer to go and buy today, Hyundai and others. How did they get there? What are the lessons that we can take from these countries and apply to South? And we're having a conversation, a team of us with CSIR tomorrow around some of this. China is in a unique position of what I term a techno-autocratic capitalism. China, when I knew it growing up, I could hardly distinguish one person from the other. You know why? They all wore exactly the same outfit. Remember seeing those pictures? Can you see another Chinese person using the same outfit today? They may be wearing the same brand. Can you see the radical change of what's happened? And of course, Russia. I was in Geneva, Switzerland living when I saw the beginnings where the East and the West Germany and in the old Soviet Union, if you remember, started dismantling. Guess what happened? You now got very wealthy oligarchs, mafias, running businesses in places like Eastern Europe. And at the same time, while all this is going on, which you've been talking about for the last 2 days now, is the advancement in technology. Friends that I have internationally are developing the new 6Gs as we speak. The rest of Africa, outside South Africa, is battling to get from 2G to 3G. Of a population of almost 8 billion people, a frightening statistics, almost 4 billion people do not have access to the internet today. Think about it. Social media, we know, it can work for you or it could work against you. The rise of mobility, digitalization, robotics, machine learning, and automation. All the stuff we've been chatting about. So if we look at closer to home in South Africa, what has been the impact of COVID-19? It descended on us almost 18 months ago. I remember the day because I published a paper on the 26th of March, and it said something to this: why South Africa should not put all its manufacturing eggs in the China basket. Some of you might have seen it. I never said we should not participate in globalization and connectivity, and that's the kind of discussion we'll continue having tomorrow in the workshop. The country and the economy was temporarily closed down. SA lives changed to previously unimaginable ways. All of us here. We've mastered the art of mask wearing. I have masks everywhere. Everywhere, multiples of them. I supported many African children that have been making masks, and I distributed them in terms of providing a service to the economy. The panic of homeschooling. I was in Cape Town where I have a 10-year granddaughter. It's frustrating. Her parents are on social media, on business. She's trying to do it online, etc. So it's challenging. It's a huge challenge. And of course, the exhaustion of virtual meetings. We as an organization last year, Caroline and Madeleine will attest to this, we ran almost 2 webinars per month. Okay? We changed that this year. We had 1 webinar per quarter. So what are the learnings from that? And of course, the anxiety of job losses and unemployment. This is real, very, very real and the rise of entrepreneurs as an opportunity. And of course, the salaries, lockdowns, and the curfew. So business anxiety has increased. There's no doubt about this. Across the board. From a personal impact, what has affected you? I have witnessed this personally. I have lost family. I have lost friends, loved ones. I had no privilege of physically being with my family, friends, colleagues in their final moments to give them a hug. I actually got onto Facebook and to Zoom to watch what is. Did you ever comprehend this? Did you ever think about something like this? It's unimaginable. It's only 18 months ago. It's become the norm. It's not being human anymore. We're living like zombies in a virtual world. The whole gatherings, the size of the gatherings, different cultures have different practices. That's all been destroyed. It's been changed. And people have adopted to this grudgingly. It's not because they want to do it. Okay? So the stress levels for all of us have increased. And I would like to see what the stats are in terms of conflicts within households. It must be huge. What are the country challenges at a very high level? There are thousands, if not millions, of children in this country that are going to bed hungry every day. Unemployment, I've shared this with you already, is at a record high. Health resources are being stretched and it's almost at breaking point. I have family and friends in the medical industry. They have personally shared with me their challenges. I take my hat out to them in terms of their passion, commitment from a human element perspective. The government coffers are empty. They're running on reserve. No more reserve. It is an absolute disgrace and shocking to be called a public servant in this country. It's supposed to be serving us. They are stealing from us. And this is being recorded. Okay? That's the kind of conversations we should be having. Whistleblowers are getting killed. I'm almost 70. I'm only starting my career. God forbid, I take a bullet. That's fine. I've served my purpose. I want you to join on this journey. We are scaring off potential foreign investors. The mining sector, 25 years ago, contributed 28% to our GDP. Anglo-American people are here. Show of arms. Do you know what the percentage is today of mining contribution to GDP? Okay, let's generalize. It's single digits. We'll be generous. What did we do? Is it because we've run out of resources that we don't have resources? I'll tell you what the problem is. It's because of policy uncertainty for me as a foreign investor or a local investor. Because as an investor, I'm looking at guarantees on return on investment. Despite that, the mining sector has saved us as a country with the highest contribution, mainly from the platinum producers like Amplats and others, to the tax. And that's one, and it's cyclical. It's not going to be there forever. So we need proactive government initiation. So that's why we are engaging with some players in government. And starting with one of them tomorrow, an entity in the CSIR, while we are doing other interventions, some of which I shared yesterday with the DTIC on the automotive sector. So what are the saviors? People like yourselves in the audience. The private sector has got broad shoulders and has been carrying this country. But you can only do so much. What we need is genuine private partnerships. I've seen these private partnerships work. I mentioned Tata. If you go to India, the Tata Group manages your passports. They do, at the time I visited some years ago, 60 million passports per annum. And I went there and I had an experience of this. It's unbelievable. Talk about a public sector, customer-friendly environment. Those are kind of partnerships. These partnerships can work. And this is what we need to do, is genuine win-win partnerships between private and public sector. It's the responsibility of big business on the SMME community ecosystem. Big business has been just as guilty as public sector. They've been playing lip service to what is called ESD. I put an S in front of the E to make it sustainable enterprise supply development as opposed to be tick box exercise. So we're having conversations and we need you to join us in your organizations. And we heard about every country in the world that the SMME is a very important part of the entire ecosystem. This is something that needs to go beyond talk. If you've never run a business in your life and you do not know what it is to pay the bills and what working capital is, but you're sitting in a kufshi office and talk about SMME in the ivory tower, you have no clue what it is to feed your family at the end of the day. We know what it is. We do this on a daily basis. Okay? At the same time, the positive thing about COVID is that new entrepreneurs are billowing. And you saw one example from the young gentleman this morning. Doing stuff. People are doing side hustles, multiple income streams. And that's really what they're doing. And really the country owes the private sector a great deal of gratitude. So a little bit about the future, based on some of the learnings. We need to rebuild equivalent to post-World War II and Cold War mindset. Is being able to look, and that's why you saw my title, which has changed from CEO some 18 months ago to CVO. We were told by research that we have a right brain and a left brain, one on logic, other on creativity. I'm talking about a whole brain now. How do we take both? And that's why I changed my title and lead by example. You should be a visionary with creativity of leading at every level, getting beyond the titles. And that's what we need more of. So we need to work on the people, because the psyche of the people is probably the most important thing. That you can look at negativity or positivity. You know, it works exactly the same way. If you try it, okay, I'm an optimist. But if we focus on negativity things, it'll come to you. So we need to change the mindset to hope and positive aspirations and putting people first before anything else. Not your mission statement on your walls and that kind of nonsense that we see in business. I chatted about the innovation cube that we invented. Scientists and engineers, there's lots of them around. This country, I mentioned it last night, has been leading for many years in innovation. They need to drive the agenda. We need to invest in new skills. Lots of talks. I hear about companies spending X% of their profit in skills, and I say, show me. I can't see, with a few exceptions. Where is these skills? Having skills is one, sir, but having employment, creating the employment to utilize these skills, and focusing on things like science, technology, engineering, and maths. And then, of course, government changing the policies to encourage domestic international investments. The balance between insourcing, outsourcing, manufacturing, IT services. Again, I look at India. They mastered the art of outsourcing in the IT sector. Anand and I were having a conversation. If India pulls the plug on Wall Street tomorrow, they're gone. Think about that. Let that sink in a little bit. They run the Wall Street. They run the IT companies. They run many, many organizations like that. So how do you have a balance between the benefits of outsourcing and insourcing, and the choice of what you outsource and what you insource? Which are the crown jewels that you keep, that you have control of, and the stuff that you can outsource? Those are the kind of things you look at. It's not either or. And protection of IP data, cybersecurity through all the stuff you've been talking, one of the biggest issues. I have a niece right now who is being certified by Cisco, one of the few people in the world around the next wave of cybersecurity threats that are coming. How do you do this interaction detection and doing proactive stuff, not after the fact? And this is something I created last year during our webinar. Many organizations that we visited, we found that the C-suite has been totally removed from what the reality is on the ground. So we need authentic and purposeful leadership. So what we have, including our group at MESA as an example, we have very good IQ. We have engineers of all flavors. The most important thing, as far as I'm concerned, for now and the future, is what is called EQ, emotional quotient, which is people first. And if you multiply that by what we call SQ, which is a systems quotient, a way of thinking, and what you've been talking about all the time, the digital quotient, will give you what I believe is organization integration. It is the biggest challenge in the largest corporations to the smallest businesses that we work in. There are pockets, and you can talk about all this big data and all this stuff, etc. You'll be wasting a lot of money unless you get this formula right. How do I get the message from the C-suite to the ground floor where the work really happens and where the truth resides? Okay. So some key areas of focus for South Africa. There's no-brainers: infrastructure, spending on infrastructure. Manufacturing, this is what this audience has been talking about. The mining sector, transportation, energy. These are the key areas. I want to conclude by something that I've been following for many, many years. And I know there are doctors and PhDs in the audience, no disrespect, is what I referred to as intelligence, where you are a subject matter expert on whatever field you've aspired to excel in and get your certificates and degrees, etc. But we need to start looking at focusing together and complementing our intelligence with what I call intellect. And intellect allows us to make informed choices. Let me give you a simple example. My partner, Ian, is a vegan. So the humans is one of the few species that can make a decision whether to be a carnivore or a vegan or a vegetarian. But most animals are pre-programmed. A lion who's a carnivore cannot get up tomorrow morning and say, hey, it's quite fashionable to become a vegan, I'm now going to become a vegan. You get the point? We as humans have a choice. I can get into a whole thing about why we should become vegetarians and not having canines and digestive systems, but that's a topic for another day. Okay? So if we look at the innovation cube mentality of how we think, multiplied by integrity, and integrity is not a word, it's a way of life. From the time you get up in the morning till the time you go to bed, that is, when people ask me, what's your religion? My religion is my way of life, the way I conduct myself. If I say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it for you. And it doesn't have to be a contractual relationship to pay expensive lawyers. That's the kind of leadership we're talking about. And last but not least, a number of my friends are very involved when we saw something around carbon issue. We have to coexist with our natural ecosystem, the 5 elements that ultimately control us: earth, water, fire, air. The air that today is causing the problems through this virus. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dilley. Amazing insights, and I just hope that this message can be really broadcast to our vision, our leaders